Hi, my name is Scott Bradfield, and I'm teaching this module of online education for City Lit University, or City Lit, and the course is called Short Story Writing. I am going to try to tell you everything I know about writing short stories over the next 10 weeks, and it'll be easy to do because I don't know a lot, but the little bit I do know, I will try to teach you. The first thing I need to warn you of is this is my first online education class. I'm learning as you are. The, uh, the prospect of actually filming myself in front of a camera is not something I look forward to, but you guys at home can actually watch these lectures when you feel like it, at your leisure. You can do what you want. Rather than be in a class, you can eat cookies or pet the dog or watch half of Grey's Anatomy with one of your eyeballs while you're looking at me. You can stop me when I get boring and listen to me later. And so the advantages are all yours. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to see myself on this camera while I speak. So if I flinch or look a little awkward, it's because I have to look at my face on the camera. And that's my dog growling, who's going to have to leave the room. Okay, so the first part of this class today is I just want to talk about just the basic discipline of writing. This is something I talk to all my students about in every class I teach, and that is that there are two or three things you need to do if you're going to become a writer or write anything that you're proud of. And those two or three things that you need to do have nothing to do with learning or education or being smart. They're just discipline. The disciplines of being a writer. And I'm going to tell you those secrets now. Every writer knows them. Everyone who's ever published or produced much work knows these rules, and you're going to get the secret. The secret is very simple. One, you have to write every day. So the first rule of becoming a writer is not to take classes, not to read books about writing. It's simply to sit down every day, and if you want to be a fiction writer, every day you sit down and write some fiction. I always tell my students that basically any time of the day is a good time to write, but you should find a particular time of day that works for you, a time maybe when the kids are taking, the babies are taking naps, or before you go to work in the morning. So sometimes when you come home from work, as I can tell you, I'm in such a bad mood, I don't want to write. So it's good to write before you go to work, before you deal with the day's bills, the day's headaches, or the latest transport crisis. Write when your mind is as clear as possible, and try to focus on a specific part of the day that you will write in. Now, you don't. The other secret is that you don't need to write well every day. You can write crap every day. You can write crap for many, many days. As I can promise you, I can write crap sometimes for months at a time before I find something I really am enjoying to write and something that's working on the page. But the main thing is you need to write something. So don't give yourself tasks. For example, I'm going to write chapter 1 of my novel this weekend. You're just giving yourself a job, or you're giving yourself a disappointment. Get up every day and just write something. If you give yourself 20 minutes every day to do some writing, that's what I do. I try to say if I do 10 or 15, 20 minutes of work, I'll be happy. I give myself a couple hours if I can. So if the work goes well, which it often does, I can sit down for an hour or two and write. If you have a full day ahead of you, that's fine. But the main thing is to do something every day. And if you miss a day, which will happen, maybe Christmas Day you won't find time to write. Maybe your wife or husband's in-laws will be visiting and you will have trouble going down to the basement to write for 10 minutes. So those days may come along you can't do any work. You will know you're a disciplined writer when you feel miserable that day. So if you miss a day, it may happen, but you should feel miserable and annoyed if you miss your work. So that's the secret. Write every day. Every writer who's ever published anything of value will usually say, write every day. The famous quote that Raymond Carver's fond of uses in one of his essays from Isaac Dinesen is, I write a little bit every day without hope and without despair. And that's a good piece of advice. Hemingway in A Movable Feast says similar things about how he writes every day. And he says, every day I sat down and I tried to write one true thing. And if I wrote one true thing, I'd come up with a second true thing. And every statement I made in my piece of fiction, I tried to make it as true as I could make it. He also said that when he rather than finish a scene at the end of the day's work, he would soften. If a scene was going well, he would stop in the middle of the scene. That's a very good piece of advice, and I've heard that from other writers, and I do it often. Don't end the scene. The next morning, you may have to start up and create a whole new scene. That's hard. I'll often try to think of the first few lines of the next scene before I quit. And then the next day, I'm not looking at a blank sheet of paper. So you write every day. You write fiction. You try to write page after page, move forward. Don't write notes and ideas for stories. Those will mount up. I have so many students who come to me with pages and pages of notes for stories and novels that they can't write. And you don't want to write notes. You can do that in your free time. You sit down to write, you write scenes, progressive, one scene after another, and try to find your way towards the end of your story or your novel. So those are two simple pieces of advice. I'm not a particularly sophisticated person, so I won't be able to tell you the really clever things. The stuff I know is just basically the no-brainer stuff, the stuff that most of my students have trouble doing, and that's what I'll try to reinforce over the next 10 weeks. Write every day. The second thing is read every day. Read good fiction every day. Don't read stuff you're supposed to like. Read good contemporary writers that you enjoy. It can be science fiction, fantasy, horror, women's romance novels. It can be thrillers. Whatever you like, read it, and read stuff that makes you enjoy reading, and then you will try to transmit that joy of reading into your writing, because you want to write stuff that you enjoy reading, and you have to remember the joy of reading while you're writing. So those are the two pieces I would say, two pieces of advice to start with. Okay. Finally, whatever you do every day, try to have fun with what you're working on. So if you start finding yourself stuck, you start getting a story going and you don't know where to go with it, and you get up and you dread sitting down to write that day, and you're writing a story or a novel and you really just aren't enjoying it, you should stop and try something else. You can always put something aside. You can always go back to it. Don't get yourself all locked up into something that's not fun. And the first thing you should do when you get locked up, you start being depressed that you have to sit down to work, you don't know what's going to happen next, put it aside, come up with something totally new, try to have a good time, write whatever comes to your mind. So those are some basic tips, and I'm going to stop the first half now. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about what a short story is. Short stories are obviously short. Most important thing about a short story, again, I've told you I would tell you the no-brainer stuff about short stories. They're very short, and they're often mistaken as an apprentice medium for writing fiction. This is, as any good short story writer will tell you, this is balderdash. Short stories are actually a lot more difficult to work and produce successfully and regularly than novels. There's a number of obvious reasons why. First of all, the basic rule for what defines a short story, and this is the only good definition I've heard, is Edgar Allan Poe's definition. It's a story that can be read in one sitting. Now, that doesn't help you with length. What is a good length for a short story is open to debate. It could be a 2-sentence story. There's the famous Frederick Brown story. A man sat alone in his room at the end of the world. There was a knock at the door. It's 2 sentences. It's a complete short story. Or you can go all the way up to maybe Heart of Darkness, a very long story that can be read in one sitting. You can sit in your chair. You don't have to get up, go to the bathroom, or make coffee, or get a drink. And when you sit down and read a story, a Raymond Carver story may take 10 minutes. An Edgar Allan Poe story may take 10 minutes. An Alice Munro story might take a half hour, 45 minutes. The main thing is you've sat and read it from beginning to end. And you haven't let the world intervene. You haven't answered the phone. you've looked at the complete structure of the story. Now, this means you're reading the short story with a lot more concentration. You're paying attention to every sentence, and you're not putting the story down to get up and go to work or to pick up the kids from school. You aren't reading you're reading one story and with concentration. This is one of the reasons I think the short story is not as successful today as it used to be. People don't have the concentration to read uninterruptedly for a half hour or an hour. Now, when you read a story from the beginning to end, you start to respect the form of the story. Whether every scene is important, whether it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, most important qualities of a short story. That it starts somewhere, and then it develops the idea that it starts with, and then it takes that idea somewhere new, hopefully, somewhere unusual. So most short stories bring out the critical in the readers, and readers are a lot more annoyed by bad endings, by assumptions that are set up at the beginning of the story that are abandoned. Short story readers are a lot more careful in their judgments, and they're paying attention. So short story writers have to be pretty good. That's the long and short of it. Now, for example, I'll read the first sentence of a Raymond Carver story that you're supposed to read this week. It's called Neighbors, and it's up on your assignments. And this is your one text for the class. We're dealing with one book of stories by Raymond Carver. The first sentence is, Bill and Arlene Miller were a happy couple. It's the first sentence of a story. It's a perfect first sentence. First of all, it tells us who the story's about, Bill and Arlene Miller. If Bill and Arlene Miller disappear in the second paragraph of the story, the reader's going to be disappointed. If Bill and Arlene Miller aren't the subject of the story throughout, and if something doesn't happen to Bill and Arlene Miller at the end of the story, something changes in them, the readers are going to know, even without being critically conscious of it, the story didn't work. So the first sentence of a story and the first paragraph of the story is extremely important, as are every paragraph in a short story. So you set up assumptions in the beginning. You're going to develop them in the middle of the story, and then you're going to fulfill them somehow, or take them beyond that fulfillment at the end of the story. To put it in a general way, we'll talk specifically about it over the next few weeks. But more importantly is you sit down and you read a story like Neighbors, and you're going to read it all for this class next week. It's 5-6 pages. You read it, and you come to the ending, and you recognize a complete piece of work there. And that means that the writer's going to have to be very careful and make sure they cut every extraneous bit that can be cut, and are going to develop everything that needs to be developed in that story. I compare it to, say, a schlocky novel, a John Grisham novel, say, or a Stephen King novel. And in one of those books, you take Cujo. Cujo's attacked. Cujo's some dog that's attacked some people in a car. Page 20. And you can get about 100 pages into that book, and you can be watching television sometimes, or going for walks, or you can put the book down and pick it up again 3 months later, and the dog will still be trying to break into the car. And half of the scenes will be flashbacks, where people were born, where they worked for a living, and you'll have all this extraneous information that the reader stops paying attention. They don't have to read every sentence. It doesn't require a lot of concentration, and it's not hard to remember where they were when they pick up the John Grisham book 2 months later, and they're still being pursued through Louisiana, or the good guys are being threatened by the bad lawyer or something. You can have a lot of unimportant information in a novel, and you can't do that in a short story. So you have to be extra careful, and the techniques we're going to talk about need to be maintained, and when you decide to make changes in any of these rules that you're going to set up in your stories, you need to be aware you're doing them. So those are your main concerns. You're going to have to have a complete story with a beginning, and a middle, and an end. Okay, so finally, I'll just give you the quick ground rules. Again, we'll be developing this as we go along. This is new to me too. Many of you may have taken online courses. I haven't posted lectures before. I'll be putting the lecture on first day of the week, and you can watch that when you like. The reading assignments will be posted online. This week, for example, you've got 2 stories to read. One is from the assigned text, the story Neighbors. And when you read Neighbors, I want you to do 2 things. One, I want you to identify specific passages that you like. Don't tell me, don't identify passages you don't like. Identify passages that you like and that you want to be able to do when you write a short story. Okay? Simple as that. You can explain why you like them, but that's not the most important thing. Just pick a passage you like. Second of all, I want you to look at point of view. We'll be talking about point of view next week. And whose point of view is it? So think about who's seeing the story as it happens, and whose head are you in as the story is going along. So look for those two things. Post very brief comments on the bulletin board. And if you have trouble, always write me, email me. I'll put my email address on there so you can contact me, but try to contact me through the bulletin board. I'll be checking in every week. And those are your two assignments on neighbors. There's another story by Dorothy Parker called A Telephone Call. I'll post public domain stories along the way, so you have other stories to read besides Carver. The reason we're using a Carver is not because I think you will like him, I think you will, but because the techniques that I want to talk about in this class are clear on the page, in almost every page of Carver. And those are the writers I want to focus on. There's lots of wonderful writers out there. But Carver, Tobias Wolff, I put a number of people on a list in a bibliography of short story collections that you can look at. Most of those are writers, James Lasden, who you can read in almost every page. The basic techniques are very consistent and very clear. So we're going to focus on them this term. Now, then I want you to do another thing, which is to write the first paragraph of a short story. You're going to write a 3-paragraph short story for me in the next few weeks. And I want you to write the first paragraph of a 3-paragraph story. I'm not going to give you any more guidelines than that. Do your best, write every day, write the first paragraph, and post it online before the end of the week. And we will look at each other's paragraphs, and I will make some comments on them in my presentation next week. So keep writing. We'll all be on the bulletin board. We'll set up a time that we can all be there between X and Y, and we'll expect all of us to be there if we can to talk or to write or exchange information every week. So we have kind of a contact time. I think it's best just to do it online, and that way everyone's computer will work, and if it doesn't work, you can catch up on the bulletin board. But let's plan all to be there on X at X. Okay? So write every day, read some good stories every day, and we'll talk to you next week.